I'm so excited to have everyone in the same room today. You've all passed the first test of finding the GSE&IS building in Los Angeles on campus, and I'm thrilled you're here. You've come from far and wide, close and near. And we have here today community archives practitioners from all over the country. We have a participant Skyped in from Croatia later on. And we have many community archives practitioners from Southern California and students from UCLA here today. It's really a dream come true to have all of you here in one space. Today's forum is hosted by myself and by Burgess Jules, who's the University Archivist at UC Riverside. And the event is made possible by the generous support of the Institute of Museum and Library Services, for which we are extremely grateful. Today's forum will focus on defining community archives, specifically the ways community archives define themselves. Community archives are diverse in several ways, including the ethnic, racial, cultural, and gender communities they represent, as well as by size, organizational structure, and collaborations. This forum will be an opportunity to discuss the diverse types of community archives that exist in the US and to learn about their history, work, challenges, and possibilities. We hope today will be a vital first step in laying the groundwork for developing effective, collaborative, and sustainable networks that can support the needs and growth of community archives. We also hope today will be an opportunity for community archives practitioners to discuss the possibilities and challenges of participation in a national strategy for access to digital cultural heritage materials. We hope to address today what I think is a tension between the autonomy and independence of community-based archives and the potential for their participation in a larger national effort or framework to make histories of underrepresented communities available digitally. So for me, some important questions to think about today are how can community archives maintain autonomy while participating in larger structures digitally? Should they participate in such digital structures, and if so, on what terms? I ask you to think about these questions throughout the day as we listen to our two fabulous keynote speakers and the rest of the panelists. At the end of the day, starting at 3:45, we will open the floor up to have a discussion to get your input on these very questions. I'm of the opinion, as Joyce and Jared and I discussed yesterday, that those who are most vulnerable have the most to contribute to the conversation. So if you're feeling shy or left out, or if something seems missing from the conversations, please do not hesitate to make your voice heard. We really want to hear from you in particular.
Joining us today. I just want to thank take this opportunity to thank our partners on this project. We brought together a really impressive group of folks, and we've been working over the past year to bring this all together, and we're really excited to see this day happen. So I'd like to thank Dr. Michelle Caswell and Samit Malik, who are the co-founders of the South Asian American Digital Archive, Nito Robinson, who is the founder of the Shorefront Legacy Center in Evanston, Illinois, not in Chicago, Dr. Kara Oledge and Christopher Harder from the Amistad Research Center in New Orleans, Dr. Kim Kristen Withy, the creator of the awesome CMS Mukurtu platform, and my good friend Tamar Evangelisti Authority. We all worked very hard on this. I'm really thankful for all of us coming together and making this happen. As Michelle already did, I also want to thank IMLS for supporting this series of forums. This is the first of 4 meetings we're going to be hosting over the next year. We'll explore ideas around supporting the growth, sustainability, and innovation around community-based archives. Besides being funded by IMLS, these forums were also inspired by the launch of their, I see some of my fellow graduate students back there. These forums were also inspired by the launch of their National Digital Platform Initiative. And for those of you who haven't heard of it, the National Digital Platform was launched by IMLS a couple years ago as part of their National Leadership Grants Program. IMLS describes the National Digital Platform as a way of thinking about and approaching the digital capability and capacity of libraries and museums across the US. It is the combination of software applications, social and technical infrastructure, and staff expertise that provide digital content, collections, and related services to users in the US. They go on to say that as libraries and museums increasingly use digital infrastructure to provide access to digital content and resources, there are more and more opportunities for collaboration around tools and services that they use to meet their users' needs. It is possible for each library and museum in the country to leverage and benefit from the work of other organizations in shared digital services, systems, and infrastructure. So this is a really impressive initiative, obviously by IMLS, and I think it allows for a lot of creativity in the types of projects and innovation it can support. But we also saw the potential for this initiative to prioritize the supporting of the usual suspects, right, in the traditional library, archives, and museum spaces. And we wanted to do our part to make sure that didn't happen. We wanted an opportunity to have conversations about the value of inclusivity in major initiatives like the National Digital Platform. So these forums are about including non-traditional cultural heritage spaces in the national conversation about digital collections, infrastructure, innovation, and collaboration. And we're thankful that IMLS and the reviewers saw value in our proposal. So there are three main goals of the forums. One is to create a space for critical conversations, to develop effective and sustainable networks, and to increase collaboration with national digital initiatives. And we're going to try to cover, some aspects of all of these in each of the four forums.
I have been an organizer for as long as I can remember, going back to that third grade summer environmental campaign that I ran. So activism is in my blood and is the first place that felt like home to me. And despite burning out professionally, being an organizer is not an identity I can shake off. When I was a professional organizer, I spent a lot of time trying to uncover the history of my organizations, being frustrated by knowing I was essentially recreating a wheel that was lost when we didn't preserve it and make it easily accessible. And then seeking out older activists for their fleeting and often fragile memories of what they had done before, what had worked before, and what hadn't worked before. Always an archivist before I even actually understood what that meant.
To get us started on that justice field journey, I have two goals that I want to accomplish with this address. The first goal is to heighten your awareness to common characteristics of the archival endeavor that I hope community archives will avoid replicating. The second goal is to investigate the import of liberatory archives, which are a type of community archive, while focusing on two actions that these spaces have the potential to engineer: the action of belonging and the action of believing. The action of belonging and the action of believing are two of the most fundamental exercises of the human spirit, and it's my argument that liberatory archives possess the potential to engender both actions within communities whose humanity traditional archives fail to recognize and respect.
In this position, I've been with the archive for a little over 3 years, but I'll talk a little bit about, really inspired by Jen and Jared earlier, talk from a very personal and passionate place. So I want to share a little bit about how I began thinking about archives, and it started sometime in the 90s. I won't date myself too much, but I was at an elite women's college and took a class as a first-year student. Took a class called Museum.
Additionally, that they reside in spaces outside traditional academic and government institutions. Sitting here, relatively comfortable at UCLA, this discussion funded in part by a $100,000 government grant, we are forced to think critically about what constitutes a community archive. That is, we should be cautious with notions of independent alternatives and outside spaces. My understanding is that this project we are engaging today aims to embody IMLS's championing of diversity and inclusion with the goal of increasing marginalized communities in our digital cultural heritage. There are great possibilities in this endeavor, but they are not assured. Given the states and capitals' leanings to appropriate and discipline difference, there is a lot at stake. There are dangers present. In what follows, my understanding of these dangers is informed by the work of Roderick Ferguson, Catherine McKittrick, Sadia Hartman, and others. We have arrived at this moment through social movements, both past and present, demanding space of acknowledgement that we too deserve breath and the joy of life. Then as now, dominant formations of power have sought to resolve the contradictions of social exclusion and potential attending ruptures through affirmation, recognition, and legitimacy of minoritized life. As we move toward greater inclusion and support for community archives, it is imperative that we do so critically in ways that make transparent the rules of inclusion and anatomies of recognition and legitimacy that already shape the paths of our journey.
All right, so I'm gonna introduce all of our speakers at once, and they will be presenting in the order that's on the program. Okay. All right. So our first speakers are Charles and Pauline Brown, who are the co-founders of the Compton 125 Historical Society that preserves the history of Compton. Our second speaker is Sharon Sekon, who is the founder of a studio for Southern California History, which is a nonprofit resource dedicated to equity, chronicling and sharing the region's social history in order to foster a sense of place. And then our final speaker is Amanda Woodson, who works for the Sherman Indian Museum in Riverside, California, and she's also a PhD student in history at the University of Riverside. So,
meaning that Compton in 2013 turned 125 years old. And in that time, we were driving through the city and we didn't see no buzzing about it. So long story short, we decided to do some investigation and decided to drive through some other cities, and there were cities that were not as old as Compton, and they had their little flags up, and we were like, okay, so 125 years compared to 45, what's going on? We then approached the city manager of the city of Compton and inquired to see if anyone in the city was making some kind of preparation to celebrate the 125 years. At that particular time, nobody was, so we told them that we had an idea. And from one thing, it led to 11 months of one event per year. We did our first general meeting where we invited the community to come on board, and about 35 to 40 people from the community showed up and came together, and we had about 7 categories that defined what the city would be when it comes onto the mosaic.
I started the Studio for Southern California in 2006. Our mission is to critically chronicle and share the region's social history in order to foster a sense of place. We sponsor exhibits, research projects, a library, an oral history program, walking tours, and our online resources, which I'm talking about today. All of our projects are archived on the LA History Archive. And all of our archives are multicultural because it's the history of Southern California, which is a multicultural space. I wanted to give you just a little example. If you look at this collage I made, those are from our archive. And you can see that those are pulled from different ephemera. The two Chinese boys are from a postcard that I found that was from 1909. And the caption of it was written by someone who had sent it to Kentucky and said, "Heathens are on this." Also, you have different issues with the LA Aqueduct, you have different maps, you have different booster ideals being presented in our ephemera, and I wanted to create a kind of juxtaposition of all of them, just to give you an idea that the metaphor is really who we are. I was motivated to start collecting histories when I learned about the WPA project and the Depression, when they began collecting slave histories, which is the basis for much of our understanding of slave life, and at Louisiana State University. I knew that there were plenty of people all around me who were dying and we were losing their histories, and so I was really motivated to collect those stories. You can now actually access all of those through the Library of Congress's American Memory page. When I was a graduate student, they were a dream. And so to me, the idea of having history accessible at your fingertips really came alive with the digital.
One of the things that always happens when I'm working at the museum is somebody comes in, all ages, and says, "Where are the Sherman Indians?" And I said, "Well, they're all around." And they said, no, I have an assignment and I need to find the Sherman Indians. So I have to explain to them that there's no such thing as Sherman Indians. There's many different tribes. The school represents over 75 tribes at the moment. Over its history, it's represented 150 tribes. So nowadays, the museum is dedicated to the history of boarding schools, specifically Sherman, but we also touch on other schools. I always start by giving visitors a little history because most people don't know it. The federal government founded Sherman Institute in 1902. It was the last of the 25 off-reservation boarding schools. It was modeled after the Carlisle Industrial Indian School in Pennsylvania, which was founded, of course, to kill the Indian and save the man, I think is the quote most often quoted. At the school, it promoted a program of civilization through assimilation, and while it did teach rudimentary academic skills, it mostly pushed a vocational program, which many people, like recently Kevin Whalen, who's Riverside, has published a book about native labor in Riverside. The school received accreditation in 1971 and changed from Sherman Institute to Sherman Indian School, it's known today. And currently there's about 400 students yearly. So the museum itself is housed in one of the original buildings, the administration building built in 1901. The rest of the buildings on the campus were torn down in the 1960s and 70s for earthquake prevention. So there's currently only 2 original buildings. It was registered as a historical landmark, I think in 1988.
Still Art Gallery. So it is a pleasure to be here today. I'm going to introduce our panelists in the order that they will be presenting today for 15 minutes each, and we'll have a 15-minute Q&A following. So Samit Malik from the South Asian American Digital Archive, Michelle Caswell from UCLA and SADA, and Kim Kristen from Mukurtu. Thank you so much, and let's get started with Samit. Come on up.
That will work. Our organization is a nonprofit that's based in Philadelphia, which is also where I'm based, but that works nationally to give voice to South Asian Americans through documenting, through preserving, and through sharing stories that reflect the community's unique and diverse experiences. And in my presentation today, I'll share sort of 3 things about our work with you. The first is that I will give you some broad context on the community and its history and the work that our organization does. The second is I'll share one story with you from the archive, but in that story, I'm trying to give you a sense of how this history has been overlooked by traditional archives and other repositories. And lastly, I'll share a few projects that we're working on now that work to extend on the work of the archive itself. So, Michelle and I started SADA back in 2008 because we recognized that South Asian American stories weren't being systematically collected and preserved by any other archives, museums, heritage institutions around the country. And our fear really over time was that these community histories were in danger of being eroded or perhaps even lost entirely. But our archive documents those communities here in the US that trace their heritage to Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and the many South Asian diaspora communities around the globe. So by that what we mean are those here in the US who come here through secondary or tertiary migration through the Caribbean or through South Africa or Kenya, Australia, UK, etc. According to the latest census data from 2010, there are more than 3.4 million individuals in the United States who trace their heritage to South Asia. And interestingly, South Asian Americans are actually the fastest growing immigrant community in the country.
So the title of my talk today is Impactive Community Archives, Symbolic Annihilation and Representational Belonging. So as Samit just mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of SADA. And as a co-founder of SADA, I spent a lot of time applying for grants and thinking about how we can articulate our value to the community and to funders. So we have all these quantitative measures to measure our impact on the community. So we know how many records are in the collection, we know how many people visit our site, we know how many people like us on Facebook, what our annual budget was last year, which we're happy to talk more about. I know a lot of community archives practitioners are interested in sharing kind of best practices for raising money. And so I think during the Q&A, if you're interested, ask us and we're happy to talk about it. Up until last year, 95% of our funding came from individuals, which is a really powerful number, I think. But despite having all these quantitative measures, they don't really get at what it means to have this archive, what it means to members of the South Asian American community to have this archive existing. So I'm really interested in talking about the affective or emotional impact of community archives on the communities they serve. So as a practitioner, community archives practitioner, I have this sort of practical problem. How do we measure our value? How do we assess our value? But then as an academic, I came across this concept, symbolic annihilation, which is a term that was used by feminist media studies scholars in the 1970s to talk about the ways in which women were grossly absent, grossly underrepresented, maligned, or trivialized by mainstream media. And I think this term, symbolic annihilation, is a really apt term to talk about mainstream archives and what it means to not see yourself in an archive as if you have been symbolically annihilated, as if you don't exist.
All right, so I really want to focus my talk on what I'm thinking about as purposeful preservation as a way of seeing community archives in action. And I don't normally use the term community archives, so, and I'm not an archivist, so those of you who feel like I'm at AA or something, but I'm not an archivist. But specifically, I'm going to focus on indigenous community archives and archival practices as a way to sort of signal the purposeful removal of that colonial residue that has been traditionally associated with archives, and more importantly, as a way of focusing on the relationships that actually surround what we think of as collection and display, focusing on practices of reciprocity and belonging that promote collaborative curation. That is a process that the results of which are very specifically different types and forms of access, narration, and circulation of those materials. So my work in this area really started in around 2002. After 7 years of working with the Warramungu community in Central Australia, I actually started working there in 1995 as a grad student, but in 2002 was working there and living there full time. So the Warramungu community, like indigenous communities around the world, really have several types of protocols for how knowledge should be circulated, managed, and accessed by various stakeholders. So not this sort of general notion of just open